Hi there everybody. If you're ever painting a background, you know that sometimes it can become quite tedious, and I'd like to show you this technique of using flour and water to create a batik crackle effect for a background. So I'm just doing it on a square of fabric to demonstrate. I've mixed some normal cooking flour just with some water, so it's a fairly liquid consistency, but I am going to use a nice big fat brush to spread my my flour and water. So I'm going to spread it evenly across my fabric. I know that there will be a few lumps and bumps, and the reason I haven't taped it down is because the fabric is just going to stretch as it gets quite wet. So I'm not worried about that. Just creating a new look on the surface. You could work with the mixture thicker than this, which will give you bigger cracks. It will take longer to dry, but it will give you bigger cracks. This technique is used quite extensively in Zimbabwe by the women there, who make beautiful, beautiful tablecloths to sell to the tourists. And then they paint the background surfaces with flour and water, or sometimes they even use like a porridge just to create this batik crackle effect. It is quite quick, as you can see, to apply it to the surfaces. And then the painting part is quite quick, so it's really nice. But their work that they do there is really beautiful, and they hand carve the most beautiful stamps of wild animals, which they then stamp over this crackled background. So I'm just going to brush this in the opposite direction just to make sure that I don't have any dry areas, and wherever I put my finger I will need to go over that just to make sure that the fabric is covered. So you'll notice that it's sort of wet and lumpy and slimy and looks very unappealing at the moment. But I'm going to leave this to dry naturally rather than use the hair dryer, which will maybe take a couple of hours. If you're in a hot climate, it'll dry very, very quickly. If you're in a cooler climate, just pop it near the radiator and let it be. But once it's actually dry, you're going to notice too that it's going to be slightly more yellow in color. And the other thing that you're going to notice is the fabric's going to pucker. That's normal, so don't be alarmed by that. And I will come back to show you the next step once this has dried completely. Now I've let my piece of fabric that I just brushed with my flour and water resist dry for probably about 3 hours. I was busy with other things, but you can see it's quite stiff. It's gone a slightly different color. When you look at the back, it's quite sort of wrinkly. Now I'm wanting to create a crackle in this. So I just need to explain to you that we're going to cover the flour with some paint, and the crackle is where the paint is going to penetrate the flour. So largely the color of the background will be this creamy calico color with little veins. So in order to do the crackle, I'm just going to take this in my hands and crunch it up. Try and make sure that you crunch in different directions so that you get little veins. And obviously if you put your crackle on or your resist quite thickly, you don't want to do too much of it because you might have some of it coming off. Then I've chosen a transparent fabric paint in this maroon color because I think it would be quite nice just to have a dark vein because there's going to be so little of it. And you want to work with a paint and not a dye. If you work with a dye, you're going to find that it's going to dilute the flour and water resist that you've put on, and you might start losing where the crackles are. So this is quite nice and goopy. Work with a nice dry brush, and we're going to just paint this all over the fabric. This is rather a glorious color, isn't it? Anyway, I think it'll look nice. As I start to brush this and as it starts to soak into the fabric, I will change to a different brush, one that we call a stencil brush, which has got a flat edge. So it's a roundish one with a flat edge like that, and I'll be able to use that to really work the paint into the little veins that have formed when I crunched up the resist. Just think, if you've got a lovely design of a cushion cover and you wanted a backing but you couldn't find a piece of fabric that you wanted, you could do this kind of technique quite easily because you'll get so many different colors fabric paint at your local craft shop, or alternatively you can go to a screen printer and ask them for clear textile base and then some pigment and then mix the colors up yourself. I used to do that at my shop in South Africa. It was lovely. We had about 120 different colors. I've also done several videos on this particular technique, so showing different aspects of it, and I'll link the playlist in the description box so that you're able to see, and I'll put a link up as the video is playing. So you can see that my paint is still nice and wet now, and now I'm going to swap to a different brush, and I'm using this now to really rub the paint into the fabric. And as I'm pushing it in, you'll probably be able to see some of the little veins showing up. I'm not expecting the veins to be prominent all over, because this was quite a thin, runny mixture of the resist that I had left over. So this was an experiment more than anything else. I will expect fine veins, but nevertheless it could just create something a bit different. Lovely way to do a background for quilting. You know, if you just wanted some nice unusual fabrics for your quilting projects or applique. Right, because it's small enough, I'm just going to rotate this. Now, it's not going to be this color when it finishes. Remember that. You've got to try and fit that into your brain, that it's going to be largely creamy white with little colors of veins showing through. So we started in that corner, and if I start to peel back this, you'll start to see how some of the paint is penetrating where the resist has cracked. So that's the only amount of color that we are actually going to have, not a huge big blob like this. The next steps after letting this paint dry will be to take a piece of white paper, like photocopy paper, or even some baking parchment, and put it on your ironing board, and then put the painted side of this, which is now dry, face down on your ironing board, and you're going to iron for 2 to 3 minutes, because you want to actually set the fabric paints into the fabric before you start to rinse the color out, and the resist, which is the flour and water. Okay, so this side will take a little bit longer for the color to seep through, but you can see it is happening. So we're going to leave this aside to dry, and then we're going to just do the ironing and rinsing out of the flour and the water. So there we go. Okay, so the fabric paint has dried, and if you look at the front of it, you'll first of all see that it's made the fabric curl up a little bit. The fabric is quite stiff and crunchy when you listen to it, and if you have a look at these little veins, you'll see that you've got very fine, delicate marks. So because of the size of the fabric, I wasn't looking for really enormous cracks, and one of the ways you can tell whether it's actually worked is just by flipping it over and seeing where there are any marks on the other side. And I can see that it's got really nice sort of delicate marks, which I'm really happy about. So the next step that I need to do here is to make sure that I put a piece of paper over this and go and iron it with a hot dry iron, not steam but a hot dry iron. That will set the color that's penetrated into the fabric, and then I'm going to rinse this in water. So once I've done that, I'll come back to you. Well, here is our lovely crackled background that we've prepared. I've rinsed out all the flour and water resist, and if I bring this up a little bit closer to the camera, look at all these lovely little marks that you've got here. I'm really pleased with how this has turned out. It's very delicate, and remember that we just used flour and water to create this sort of blockage. So the resist is where flour and water has stopped the fabric paint penetrating, but you'll see as I turn this around, all these lovely delicate little marks. And this would allow you to do so many things with it, apart from sort of fabric painting and quilting and stuff, that you could actually incorporate this in. You could use it on a mixed media project, you could use it for embroidery, you could play around by incorporating different things, like I've got ribbons here, maybe do a little bit of embroidery on it. There's so many options. Yeah, just a wonderful piece of things. So you could create lovely big pieces of fabric as well as just these tiny little blocks. I'm thrilled with how it's turned out. I hope you are too. If you've ever done this, please just leave me a comment so that I can hear what you've done. I'd love to hear your news. Thank you for joining me, and please consider subscribing to my channel. Bye for now.